Today's daf is daf Yutes, and we're up to Rabbi Akiva, which is about 5 lines down from the top. But let's go back to the Chachamim. We're talking about a case where there was no Geshamim in one city, but there were rains falling down in nearby cities that surround that one city. And we're going to have now machlokas between the Tanakama, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Akiva about Taanit with regard to the other cities. The Chachamim say that that city that was directly affected by the lack of rains will go full swing ahead, full forward, like the 7 Taanios Achronos of Atziras Geshamim. And that's called Mis'ana Umas Ras. So we'll have the blowing of the shofar and the fasting. However, the cities around that city and those surrounding cities were not directly affected, and therefore we don't believe that the Gzeira min Hashamayim was on those outlying cities. Then they don't go through the Masrios, they don't blow the shofar, but rather they fast. They are indirectly affected by this lack of Geshamim, and therefore they will fast. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Masrios v'lo mesanos. Rabbi Akiva says that with regard to the surrounding cities, they will blow the shofar, but they will not fast. In other words, Rabbi Akiva understood that the blowing of the shofar is a tefillah, it's a prayer. We're not going to upgrade it to a more severe level of tainus. That far we don't go. So that again, just to summarize, we're talking about a situation where the Ikar Tzara, the Ikar Gzeira, was on one city, and according to the Tanakama, we're not going to impose upon the outlying cities the chiyuv of blowing the shofar. But Rabbi Akiva says just the opposite, that he holds that it's more of a chumrah to blow the shofar, and therefore we're not going to be. Rabbi Akiva holds that the the fasting is more chomer than the blowing the shofar, and therefore we're not going to impose upon them the fast days, whereas the Chachamim impose the fast days even on the outlying cities, and they just alleviate them of blowing the shofar, v'lo masrios. And we're going to impose upon them the fast days, whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, that's going too far. We don't have to be machmer on them because they weren't affected immediately. We'll just require of them to cry out by blowing the shofar. And the Ritva points out that we do not add the extra 6 brachos to the Shmona Esrei, so that the shofar will not come at the end of each of these 6 brachos, but rather we will integrate the blowing of the shofar and the tza'akos and the tachnunim wherever it's appropriate. Not at the end of these brachos, because we don't add these brachos. Now we have a parallel machlokas between the Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva in the following case. Here, sheyesh ba dever. So we have a kind of an attack of something that's killing people, and that's called dever. Now, in the English translation here, he says that once again, we're going to have a similar machlokas. Now, he translates dever as pestilence. And he doesn't tell you exactly what pestilence is. Later on, the Gemara is going to say that in general, we don't assume that pestilence is so dangerous. But we're talking now about a city in which, as a result of the dever, people died. And the Gemara is going to ask how many people died. And that's going to be a ratio to the population. Then we have the case of Apoles, which means that the the walls that surround the city are threatening to fall. That means that if a wind comes by, then the chomos, the walls that surround the city, and maybe even some of the houses of the city will be blown away, a kind of a tornado. And in such a case, again, the machlokes that we had before will resurface. According to the Tanakama, Otsa Ir Misane Umisras, the city that is directly affected by Dever or Mapolis will go full swing with both fasting and za'aka and blowing the shofar. However, Kol Shesvivoseh, we're not going to be machmir with regard to Hasra, with regard to the other cities, the nearby cities, and therefore misanos v'lo masrios. They will fast, but they will not cry out with the shofar. Rabbi Akiva Omer, no. For the other cities, the outlying cities, we should be more mekil, and we should alleviate them of the chiyuv tainus, because Rabbi Akiva's shita is that tainus is more chomer than asros, and therefore masrios v'lo misanos. Ezu dever, at what point does this pestilence become dangerous? How many people have to die in order that the city should go full swing into Mis'ana Mesras? Ir Shemotzi'ah Chamesh Me'os Ragli. It has a population of 500 people. V'yotzim menu shlosha mesim b'shlosha yomim zachar zeh. 3 people died on 3 consecutive days, meaning 1 person died on each day. A rezeh dever. And that's the kind of a dever that generates the chiyuv tainus and hasra. However, pachos mikan, if less people died, or perhaps if 3 people died, but over the course of a longer period of time, ein ze dever. That's not this dever that will generate a chiyuv of tainus, etc. However, as far as mapoles, it seems that from the Ritva, the shear is 3 batim. If 3 batim fell, that's already considered a mapolis. Now, when the Mishnah says that 500 people make up the population of the city, it's referring to males, 500 men, and older men are not included. Nashim v'taf are not included. It's all those who are employed. So we're talking about 500 people that have jobs. However, with regard to the people that died, how many people died? We said 3 over the course of 3 days. Then we include everybody. Anybody in the city will set up that shear of a dangerous dever. The Mishnah continues, Al elu masriya misanim b'chol makom. Now, until now, we said that masriya misanim, that only applies to the city that was directly affected. Now we're talking about what's called a mahaleches. Mahaleches means that even from a distance, you're still in danger. B'chol makom. Even if the makom tsara is far away, you're still in danger. For example, ala shidafon. This is an easterly wind that destroys the tfuah. The ala yerakon. Now here we have a machlokus, exactly what yerakon is. According to Rashi, it's choli beguf. It's a human condition. Shahofech es tseva pnei ha'adam liarok. I guess would be jaundice. However, in the English translation, he has a different interpretation of Yerakon, and he says that Yerakon means that the grain begins to yellow and wither. So that's a very intense drought. That's called Yerakon. These are different types of locusts that attack the grains. If you have a wild beast that kills people, and you see it in the city during the day, these are chayalim that come and they destroy people's lives. Masri and Alea, this is a tzara everywhere. The key word here is maleches, which in modern Hebrew is mispashetes. it spreads, and we're talking about situations of attacks from either locusts or wild beasts or chayalim, and they go from place to place, like the Crusaders. Masechet yardu zakedim. It's a famous statement of the Gemara. And what happens is the Zakanim sat in the Lishkas HaGazis on the outskirts of the Beis HaMikdash. Mishalayim la'reim. They came out of the Sanhedrin, the walls, the chambers of the Supreme Court in Eretz Yisrael, the Gazu Taanit, and they enacted and decreed a fast. Al Shadnira Kimlo Pi Tanur Shidafam Ba'ashkelon. It was enough of a shidafon so that a certain amount of grains, we'll explain exactly what that volume of grain is, would be affected by shidafon. What is the volume of grain? It's called Kimlo Pi Tanur. In other words, you had enough grain that if you were to bake in the oven a loaf of bread, that loaf of bread would fill up your, let's say, a small oven. That's enough already, if it's been affected by a makkah of shidafon, to be gozer tainus, and that's what exactly happened in Ashkelon. And the Mefarshim point out that Ashkelon, probably not the Ashkelon of today, but the Ashkelon of then was Eretz Plishtim, and it was Chutzlar. And even so, the Anshe Sanhedrin, Gazu Tainus, they declared a fast day in the cities in Eretz Yisrael because it's a Makkah Hamaleches. V'od, and another story, Gazu Tainus, they decreed a fast in the entire Eretz Yisrael, Sha'achlu Ze'evim Shnei Tinokos Be'ever Yarden. That 2 children ever were killed, were attacked by wolves on the other side of the Jordan. That's in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because if there are ze'evim, there are wolves. Wolves are very dangerous animals, and it's a makkah maleches. They go from place to place, and they endanger the lives of people, even at a distance. Rabbi Yossi Omer, lo al sha'achlu el al shadnira. The case was not that they actually destroyed the lives of 2 children, but they were in appearance. They were noticed by young children. And according to Rabbi Yossi, if they spotted these Ze'evim inside the city, that's not usually where the wolves will show up. And that means there's some divine decree and danger, and therefore we need to be masra, we need hasra, hatra'ah with an ayin, and also tainus. Now, up until this point, the Mishnah mentioned those sorrows that masriyan aleim, dafka b'yom chol. What about on Shabbos? Because on Shabbos, we don't want to have hasra if we can avoid it at all costs, because it undermines the sanctity of the Shabbos. Al elu masriyan b'Shabbos. Even on Shabbos, there are very grave, dangerous situations that require and override the Shabbos. And we're going to fulfill this hasra. We're going to add to atfilos anenu. And usually hasra means shofar, but here on Shabbos it cannot mean shofar because we don't blow shofar on Shabbos, as we saw in the Gemara back on Daf Yud Daled, and therefore we must assume that hasra means tfilas anenu. How and when is this situation so dangerous that it warrants adding a tfilas anenu on Shabbos? Al ir shekifu nachrim. If the Goyim have put a siege on a Jewish city and they are threatening to destroy the city, on Nahar, or if you have a river that's overflowing its banks and it's about to inundate and destroy fields and homes, al asfina mitarefes bayam, or in the case of a boat that is moving from side to side in the waters, which means that it's threatening to go down. He says it's a ship that is tossing at sea and is in danger of sinking. Rabbi Yossi Omer, on these sorrows, you're only allowed to be masriya and recite Anenu and supplications on Shabbos only le Ezra, only to call out to people, help, we need help. Below l'ta'aka, but we don't add Anenu to our tefillah. We're not sure that our Anenu is going to be meaningful at all, and therefore we're not going to override the Isut China that we don't add supplications to tefillos on Shabbos. Shimon HaTimni Omer, Af ala dever, even pestilence, and that's what we saw before, that pestilence is very dangerous. People lose lives. But v'lo hodu lo chachamim, the chachamim feel that pestilence, until proven otherwise, is not danger to human lives. And the truth is that according to chachamim, even during a weekday, there's no masriim with regard to dever, except in that exceptional case that we saw 3 people died on 3 consecutive days. The Mishnah continues, Al kol tzar shel taval at tzibur, that's a euphemism. If chalila there's a tzar in the tzibur, masrin aleim, we will blow the shofar and recite supplications, anenu and tefillah, chutz mirov geshamim. But if there's too much rain, then we don't make it into a day of hasra and of shofar, because that's called rov tova. Rov tova means that the midah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to be mashpia tov. He brings down good from benevolence from above, and sometimes the tov, the shefa, is beli gvul, and in a sense, by praying to God to stop the rains, we're sort of, in a sense, ingrates. We're not appreciating, even though, again, the too much rain is going to be a hassle for us, but rain, by definition, is tova. We don't want to pray to stop and undermine tova. And now we get to one of the most famous Gemaras in Shas. Ma'aseh she'amar lo l'choni amagel, and this Choni was a great giant in his time, spiritually. He's called Ma'agel because he made an igul around himself, a circle, and that's where he prayed. His pal sheyerdu geshamim, there was no rain falling down, and he knew for sure that God would accept his prayers and bring down rain. Amalahem. So therefore he notifies the people, Tza'u ichnisu tanurei psachim b'shvil shelo yimoku. Take in that which could be ruined by the rains. Make sure it's inside, indoors. They used to have ovens that were made out of earthenware, and if the rains come down, it could really destroy the ovens. But it's palev lo yardu geshamim. And yet, after Choni Hamagel prayed, the rains didn't fall. Me'asa, what did he do? Og uga, he made an incision of a circle around him in the ground. V'yom b'soch, he stood in the middle of that circle. V'yom alefanav, Ribono shel olam, v'necha samu pneim alai. Your children are relying on me, that I should supplicate and bring the rains. V'ani keben bayis lefanecha. I'm like a member of your household that always goes in and out. I don't have to get reshus. I don't have to ring the bell. And nishbani b'shimcha gadol shenizaz mikan ad sheterachim al barecha. I'm not moving out of this circle until you have compassion and bring down the rain. It's chilu geshamim and natfim, but it started raining in a way like now it's outside here in Yerushalayim, and then tipos, it's only raindrops. That's not going to do the job. Omar. And Choni says, Lo kach shalti. Wow. Imagine turning to the Ribono shel olam with the words, Lo kach shalti. Thanks, but no thanks. This is not what I asked for. We'll soon see that Reb Shimon ben Chetach was not happy with Choni Amagel. Ella, Gishmei boros sichenu moros. I was asking for waters that would fill up the cisterns with water. Ischilu lered bezah. Oh, so it went to the other extreme. All of a sudden, God brings down the heavy, heavy rains, torrents of rains. Amar lo kach shalti. I didn't ask for that. Ela gishmei ratzon brachon nedava. I want the good rains. God accepted his tfilos, yardu kitikunan, and the rains fell down, beratzon, ayin yafeh, bracha, nedava, and it kept raining and raining. The water started climbing up, so the members of Klal Yisrael had to leave from Yerushalayim all the way up and climb to the Har Bayis, which was the highest place in Yerushalayim. Mipnei Hagsham, because of the ribui of Gesham Bo v'Yamulo, and they came to request of Choni Amagel, Keshem Chispalalt Aleim Sheyerdu, just like you prayed for the rains to come down. Kach Ispalel Sheyelchu Lehem. Also, now we expect and we hope that you will pray to stop the rains. Amalehem Tsu'ura'u Im Nimches Even HaTanim. Even HaTanim is a stone, a very large, tall stone, that was a gathering place where if you found a lost item, you would gravitate to that stone and you would announce that you found a lost object, and then hopefully the right owner will come and identify the object. And now Choni says to the people, tell me if that stone is submerged underwater. Because if there's not enough water coming down such that that very high stone, the prominent boulder would be submerged, then I'm not going to be mavakish. This was a ploy, so to speak, on the part of Choni to avoid having to pray that the rain should stop. Now this whole story came to the attention of Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach, he was the Av Bezdin, and he said to Choni, Il mole choliato, if you weren't the Adam Gadol v'chasher that you are, goes Rani, I would have imposed upon you alecha nidu, I put you in excommunication. Why? Because you were matriach HaKadosh Baruch Hu by asking for gshamim, and you said lo kach sha'alti over and over again. This is not what I asked for. That's not the way we talk to the Ribono Shalom. That's not a proper mode of tefillah. But I'm not going to put you into nidui, shato mischate, even though you are sinning, you're doing something that's not the way it should be done. But nevertheless, you're like a child. Your bakoshos in front of the Almighty who's now makom are like that of a ben. Hashem will fulfill your will, just like a ben shumuschate al aviv. He is mavakesh all his ritzonos, whatever he wants, and he asks his father to do that, and it's going to be a hassle for his father. But the osolo ritzono, but his father is more than happy to fulfill his will. Halvai, we should be fathers of that madrega. V'alecha kosev omer yismach avicha v'imecha v'sogel yoladetecha. A pasuk in Mishlei, your father and your mother are happy that they had you, and in this case, Choni, that they were zocher to have such an Adam Gadol like you. Now, you may know that I'm a little bit into Breslov Chasidus lately, and in Breslov there's a concept called tefillah mipnei hadin. When a tzaddik says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I deserve it, and you have to give it to me, not with a lashon of tchina and compassion. And it seems that Choni was guilty, according to Shimon ben Shetach, of tefillah mitam din, and that's not usually an appropriate tefillah. And this has to do with Moshe Rabbeinu when he asks for the water to come out of the stone, and what was his sin. In any event, the Mishnah continues and explains what they would do when the Geshamim came down, how they would celebrate after their fasting. If God hearkened to their prayers and he brought the rains, Hoyu misanim. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped a paragraph. What I just said is an introduction to something that's coming a little bit later. Now we're going to discuss a different case. What happens if they were makabel the fast, and then even before they completed the fast, the rain started coming? Are they obligated to complete the fast? It all depends. Was there at least part of a fast? If before sunrise, meaning they hadn't really fasted at all. Now the rains came down, lo yashlimu. They don't have to fast to the end of the day because they didn't start the fasting. So there's a Kabbalah's tainus, and then there is the kiyum tainus, and they don't have a kiyum tainus. If they don't have a kiyum tainus, then their Kabbalah is incomplete, and they can break the fast. But liachar neitzachama, if they already began the tainus, so there was a piece of time with not only Kabbalah but also kiyum tainus, then yashlimu, once you start the tainus, then you're obligated according to the neder and the Kabbalah to complete the tainus. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, no, it doesn't depend on Netzachama, but rather on chatzos. Kodem chatzos lo yashlimu. In other words, a person might not eat breakfast and he'll only eat lunch, midday. And therefore, what he abstained from eating until midday, that's not called a fast. So there's no kiyum tainus until chatzos hayom. So if at 11:59 on a perfect day, the rain started coming down, then you don't have to complete the tainus. Li'achar chatzos, but it came down at 12 noon, yashlimu has to complete the tainus. Masechet goes with tainus to Lud. There was no geshem in the city of Lud. Yardulem geshamim kodem chatzos. And the rain started falling at 11:59. Amalem Rabbi Tarfon Su'u v'chlu v'shasu. Go out and eat, break your fast. And not only that, and now I come back to the question I asked earlier prematurely, what do we do when the rains come down as a result of our prayers? Asu Yontiv, it should be a day of simcha. And the people went out, Yotzav Yachlu Chasav Yasu Yontiv, Ubo Ben Arbayin. And then in the afternoon, after eating and drinking and rejoicing with a banquet, they came to the synagogue, the Karu Halal Agadol, and they recited the long Hallel, which is Kapitel Kuf Lamed Vav, in Tehillim, Hodu Elokei Elokim Ki Li'olam Chazdo. And in that Kapitel, it says, No Sein Lechem L'chol Basar Ki Li'olam Chazdo. So this is the greatness of God, that He gives mazon for every creature. Now the Gemara. Seder Tanios Ha'elu Ha'amur B'Revia Rishona. The Gemara understands now that the Seder Tanios, in a case where we don't have rain, is at the time of Revia Rishona. And Revia Rishona means if there's no rains on the 3rd of Cheshvan. Let me just double check that. Oh, he says Revia Rishona b'Shlosha b'Mar Cheshvan. I wasn't off. Shnia b'Shiva bo is the 7th of Cheshvan. Then we get to Kislev for the 3rd. Raminu, I have a brisa that seems to contradict that Mishnah. The brisa says Revia Rishona ushnia lishol shlishis lisanos. If the rains did not fall down by the 3rd of Cheshvan, not by the 7th of Cheshvan, then we will recite in our tefillos v'sein tal u'motul vracha in the 9th bracha berachas hashanim, but we don't fast. When do we start our fast? Shlishis, right? If we get from 3, 7, I mentioned Kislev, but it's still at the end of Cheshvan, the 17th day of Cheshvan, that's called Shlishis. No rains, then we start fasting. So how do we reconcile our Mishnah that indicates that we fast with Revia Rishona, that means on the 3rd of Cheshvan, with this brisa that says we start fasting on the 17th of Cheshvan if there are no rains. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Hachi Ka'amar, this is how we should interpret our Mishnah, Seder Taanios Ha'amur. When the Mishnah, back on Daf Yud, gives us a Seder of Taanios. Amosai, when do we start fasting? Bisman Yatsa Revir Rishona Ushnia Ushlishis. It means we integrate all these three rains into one Revia. It's called Revia Achas or Revia Rishona. And Velo Yodig Shama, if heaven forbid the rains have still not come down, then we begin the Seder Atanios. If, on the other hand, and this is going to be a case which is clearly indicative that we have to fast immediately. We're not going to wait until Revir Rishona Shniyot Shliches, and that is that Yardu Gisham Revir Rishona Vizaru, the rain started coming down, and they started planting, but the rains were not sufficient to get the plants to produce. Lo Tzamchu. Or inami tzamchu v'chazu v'nishtanu. Another possibility is that they planted the seeds and the tefua didn't grow, some other vegetation grew. Masri'in aleh miyat. Immediately, we're not going to wait until the third Revia. We start with that tefillah and that tainus immediately because the situation is very dire. Amar Rav Nachman, this halacha that we said that if after he planted seeds, but the tzemach that grew was not the crop that he was hoping for. I mean, it wasn't the 5 species of grain, so we started already a process of masriyan, etc. Is dafka nishtanu. That means that it's not growing the way it was supposed to grow, but it still is growing. And therefore it's meaningful to daven and be mispalel and be mitzrayah and blow the shofar, etc., so that it would improve the zera. That which is growing will go back to what it should have been growing. Aval yavshu, but if it dried up already, that's called a tefillah shav. Lo, it's meaningless to expect a miracle if the crop is already dried up, completely dried up. It has no takon. Gemara says pshita nishtanu tnan. What is Rav Nachman telling us? The Mishnah itself says nishtanu. Nishtanu atzmochin. Doesn't say Yisyabshu. We would never have a Hamid that he should pray when it's Yisyabshu. Lo tricha. When does Rav Nachman have to tell us that in a case of Yisyabshu there's no fasting? That's the akun. Akun means that the stalks grow. Hischilu garini atfur litzmoach ma'at b'knei hashiboles. So it's not totally dried up. I mean, there are some stalks that grow even after the crops dried up. Ma'odatem, I might think akanta. For this case of akun, where the stalks are growing, milsehi, that's already on the way to tikkun. It's improving itself. It's getting better. Milsehi, and therefore it's appropriate to daven in such a case. So here's a situation where even after the crop dries out, but there are stalks, and maybe the stalks will grow, and therefore we should pray Kamash Malon. Rav Nachman teaches a chiddush that this is already meaningless. It's already not. It's not going to be the toeles of tefillah once the crop dried up. The Mishnah says, "V'chein shepasku geshamim ben geshem legeshem." 40 days, there was a termination of rains, and there's going to be a food shortage as a result of the stopping of the rains, and that's called makas batzores and masriyan aleim. My makas batzores, what does it mean? It's not yet a famine, it's just a food shortage. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, it means Maka Mevili de Batzoris. If the situation continues and there's no rain, it's going to create a famine. Right now, it's not yet a famine, it's only a Batzoris. Amar Rav Nachman, Nara Anara. And we're again embarking on the sugya of a tzara. When is it considered a tzara and a famine? And Rav Nachman wants to point out that if you have a situation in which one city is not growing its tvua, however, you can import rainwater by boat, meaning there's a river around the city, and you just cross over the river with a boat, and on the other side, the city on the other side has plenty of grains, and therefore you will be able to support yourself in this city with the grains that you import from another city. That's called a batzoris, and that is not considered a ra'ah.